Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our SEAC meeting of Thursday, April 8th, 2021. I'd like to start off with the Land Acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississauga of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. And I will follow this with the DDSB's Human Rights and Equity Statement. The Durham District School Board is committed to learning environments that are safe, welcoming, respectful, equitable, accessible, inclusive, and free from discrimination, placing human rights and equity at the center. And we will move on to our roll call. We'll start with regrets. We have regrets from Kathy Keaty from Voice of Deaf and for Children of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and Craig Cameron, member at large. So we'll just go through the list, starting with Autism Ontario. You're muted.
Claudine Burrell from Autism Ontario. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Durham Down Syndrome.
Hi, Tara Cully. Hello.
Ontario Association for Families of Children with Communication Disorders.
Hi, Elizabeth Daniel.
Learning Disabilities Association of Durham Region.
Rowan Jarvis, good evening.
Association for Bright Children, which is myself, Eva Kyriakides, and SEAC Chair. Member at Large, Carolyn.
Carolyn McLennan.
Okay, Easter Seals Ontario.
Anna Nguyen.
Okay, our trustees.
Donna Edwards for Town of Ajax, Ward 3.
And Darlene Forbes for Oshawa.
Okay, then we'll move on to the board staff.
Good evening,
I'm
Andrea
Stephanie.
McCauley. Oh, sorry.
No.
Superintendent of Inclusive Student Services. Over to you, Stephanie.
Sorry, I'm Stephanie Pelborn, the mental health lead.
Kyla McKee, Education Officer for Inclusive Student Services.
Great, and our elementary school representatives.
Good evening, Shannon Robertson, Principal at Westney Heights.
Okay. And our secondary reps.
Good evening, Michelle Monk from Eastdale Secondary.
Okay. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Eva, you have Russ Davidson with us as well, secondary rep, as well as Melissa Sparkman's joining us by phone this evening, elementary rep, principal of Dr. C.F. Cannon.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the approval of the agenda. Do we have can we have a motion to approve the agenda? Claudine? Second, Darlene. All in favor? Okay, motion passed. Okay, and moving on then to the approval of the minutes from our March 18th meeting. Does anybody have any questions or concerns with respect to the minutes? Oh, okay. Can we have a motion then to approve the minutes? Tara, any seconders? Carolyn, all in favor? Great, motion passed. Okay, we will move on then to our Inclusive Student Services report on focus on children with youth and mental health.
So thank you to Stephanie for joining us this evening. I think one of the assets of a board of our size, I consider us to be a just right fit. So boards that are smaller have generally one clinical lead who works across the tiers in terms of well-being, mental health, as well as the clinical services. And then when boards are quite a large bit bigger, that has its challenges in moving information and resources for students as well. So I consider us a just right fit board, that we have a mental health leadership team comprised of Stephanie as our mental health leader, who works alongside Steve and Carolyn, so our leads for social work and psych, as well as our partners in Positive School Climate, which is the rebranding of Safe Schools. And where we see those two teams come together is really putting student well-being and mental health at the forefront at all times, and particularly at times of challenge as we continue to move through the pandemic. So we thought that today, as we lead into Children's Mental Health Week in May, was an excellent time to have Stephanie come give us an overview of some of the areas of focus and leadership for well-being and mental health in our system. And so this evening we've combined the presentation as well as the department report to focus on children and youth mental health and well-being. So really thrilled to have Stephanie with us this evening. And Stephanie, over to you.
Thanks, Andrea. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the work that we're doing here at the school board. I'm going to share my screen and hope it all works out. I'm always so, I feel so privileged to be able to talk about the work that we do as a school board. My history actually is in children's mental health. I was a director at children's mental health in an area not Durham, and coming here and coming to a system like a big system of education and seeing how it's a priority. It's exciting to talk about what our focus is. And as I hear you talk, I think, as you hear me talk, I'm hoping you'll see the threads of how important mental health and well-being of our students are, and the commitment as a board that we've made. And I think this year, like any other year, none other year has there been the challenges that we're facing globally when it comes to a pandemic and the issues of racism and social justice. And I think then schools where our students spend 1/3 of their day, 2/3 of their year, become that ideal place to support, to promote, to bolster student well-being. And we're going to talk a little bit specifically how we're doing that here, but at no point when I share content with you do I do that in the absence of an appreciation of our educators who are connecting with our student, that appreciates that relationship is key to supporting student well-being and mental health. When we think about what's happening, I think, again, this year, because of those relationships, we've got educators who are tuned into and alert to the increased mental health needs of our students. And so, what we're hearing in terms of the media around increases to the mental health concerns and challenges of our students, and in general, our children, is true. And our first responders are educators in the classroom that are seeing that. They're seeing the impact of COVID. And I think the attunement based on relationship is creating a sensitivity by our staff, who then can support our students in ways that this year of many years, when our students are not okay, they're hearing that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to ask for help, that we appreciate and understand they're struggling, and that support is available. And that is so important, because in doing so, our educators are cultivating, they're creating environments for students to not just survive COVID in the world we live in, but to actually thrive. And again, doing that based on the connection and the safe relationships that they're developing with students, with each other as educators, and certainly as school community. And one of the things that we as a school board are so committed to is making mental health and well-being our priority. We know that this is a challenging year, and I don't think you have to ask people if that's true. We know it is. And I think educators are so committed to wanting to do the best for students and for their families. They know that relationships are essential to helping students thrive and develop that resiliency. They know that because they see how much that works. And in doing that, we're able as a school board to mobilize resources and supports to support our students. And none of that can happen unless it's built on a foundation of educator well-being. And so absolutely, you're going to hear me talk about the importance and the work that we're doing around supporting student well-being and mental health. But all of that kind of rides on the understanding that for teachers to teach well, they need to feel well. And really an importance for us that this idea that we're building on strong mental health foundations, not only for our students, but for our staff as well. And how do we do that? We do that in a couple of ways. One is all of the work that we're doing is grounded in a strategic plan, a plan that says we are committed to creating those safe, welcoming, inclusive, and respectful learning and working places that promote the well-being of students and staff. And this plan is guided by what we refer to as a multi-tiered approach. It's this idea that we're building on tiers of need and tiers of responsibility to focus then on tiers of support. So let me explain that a bit. When I think about tier 1, what do all students need? We know that all students universally across the board need support, need those conditions that promote and build their well-being. And we know that some students need more targeted intervention, targeted skill building. We pull in our social work and our psych services staff to support us with that. And we know even with that, we have some students, a few of those students who have some more intensive mental health needs. And what this tiered model does is it provides us a framework for structuring our support and our resources and how we then come alongside each other, our students and their families to build the conditions within every classroom across every school that help our students thrive. And if you look at that bottom tier of green, what we are directing towards all of our students, those 5 areas, welcome, include, understand, promote, and partner, they're actually the 5 goals that ground our strategic plan. We believe strongly that our actions need to create those welcoming environments for students where they feel included, that they belong, that they matter, that they have educators that understand what goes into mental health and well-being, and with that have a deep invested practice of getting to know our students. And then with all of that, welcoming, inclusive environments where our kids are known, we then teach to that understanding by creating opportunities for learning that maximize what our students are capable of. And all of that in partnership with you as families, with each other as educators, and with our students as we move forward. The all students is a responsibility of all educators across all levels of the organization. And we believe strongly that when we do this, we'll be able to notice those students who do need more, who may need more early intervention to prevent things from escalating more, who may need ongoing support, or may need some targeted skill building to bolster what they already have and build on the strengths that they have. And in doing so, those students that do have some intensive needs, those few tier 3 students, we're better able to catch those and create the bridges to community-based resources. So we ensure that those students are also getting what they need, all, some, and few. And if you look at around that model, we're focusing on what evidence-based practices can guide our work, focusing on student and parent engagement while also keeping equity and human rights at the center of everything that we do. So let me walk you through a few of the highlights from those 3 tiers of work that we're doing across the system. I can't get into all of it, but I'm going to just highlight a few because I think it's important to just focus in on some of the work, the very, very good work that our teams are doing across the board. I'm going to actually hold off on the anti-Black racism toolkit because I'm going to give that its own attention and time because it is such an important resource. So some things that we're quite proud of in this work and ensuring that we're getting to all students, we've created a social emotional learning program. Social emotional learning are those skills that our kids need to navigate life. Think about things like stress management, managing emotions, healthy relationship, critical and creative thinking, those skills that help us navigate life at home, life with our friends, life at school. And so we're beginning to deliver that to students and giving them the opportunity to develop the skills that they need. We're looking at how we can help our earliest learners come into school next year and begin to do that as successful when, if we really appreciate the sort of the weight of that task, we have some junior kindergartners coming into our system that have spent half of their life living a pandemic. And so we want to pay really close attention to how we support our students, our most youngest learners. We've spent a lot of energy this school year creating resources that can get into the hands of every educator in front of every student, that creates those everyday practices within a classroom by the educator towards the student, so we can continue to build those universal practices where every student feels welcome, included, like they belong and they matter, they're understood, and the teaching environment supports our students to thrive. So those are some of our student-facing activities. And I had said earlier that one of the ways in which our students do well is we have teachers who feel well. Teachers who feel well teach well. And so we've been spending some time and energy as well in promoting the well-being of our educators, because we know how important that is. And so working in collaboration with our Human Resources Department, we've looked at some professional development opportunities that educators can come in and know that as much as we speak about how important student well-being is, so is theirs. Really reinforcing this idea, oxygen mask on, so that they can be present for our students in ways that we know they desperately want to, and that we need them to. And so we've done some mental health awareness, we've done compassion fatigue, and we've also looked at trauma-informed care training for our administrators who are leading the system of educators and students. When I think about those tier 2 highlights, some highlights that I might make is that we've increased our direct mental health supports to and for students through increasing the FTEs, or the number of staff providing mental health supports. We've also increased the ease of access, and so we affectionately call it the mental health button. If you go on our front-facing webpage, you'll see a button and it says connect with a member of your mental health team. We wanted families to realize that if your student needs support, there's not a ton of hoops to go through. You have an access to our mental health services, that through that, a conversation can be had about what might be the best way we as an organization can support your student. And so all of these have created opportunities for those students that need more mental health supports, that we have process in place to ensure that students who need it are connected to a mental health professional who can work through with that student and families how to get the supports. And why that's so important is because we're noticing a few things, and I'm going to guess that's not necessarily going to be a surprise to you. We've noticed through the mental health services that we are providing, which more of that is happening, is that students are talking about feeling that they have low moods. They're worried. There's feelings of isolation and fear. And all of this is creating a lot of anxiety and challenges related to the loss of so much that our students are facing, loss of milestones and rituals and other ways of being that is so commonly known as doing school. Kids aren't doing that. And we're noticing that has an impact on motivation and connection. Our frontline staff are also noticing that because some of the students are looking at different ways of coping with these challenges that are very maladaptive, they're not healthy for our students. And we're seeing things like an increase of substance use and an increase of disengagement from school. And of course, if I think about anyone who's a parent on this call, we're looking at increased stress on parents who are working from home and supporting students' learning needs and themselves missing routine and structure. And so all of this creates that increased need for us to be doing what we're doing so that we can support not only our students, but the families of our students, because we want our learners to learn in the best way possible. The Addressing Anti-Black Racism and Its Impact, a Wellbeing Toolkit, is a cumulative effort of frontline staff who are aware of our families in the community and our need as a board and our commitment to dismantle anti-Black racism. And when we think about mental health, you don't have to think very long and far to see its connection to equity and identity. And this toolkit is the intersection of looking at mental health and the impact of racism and racial trauma on our families. It was recently launched. We're doing a system implementation rollout, and it can be accessed actually on, again, our front-facing webpage. And I just kind of want to do a shout out to those that have created this document, because as a mental health lead, I'm one of 73 across the school board. There's a larger body that supports the mental health work, sort of like they're an arm between the Ministry of Education and school boards as it relates to promoting positive mental health and well-being. They have noticed the richness of this tool. And we'll be sharing that across the province to all other school boards because of the important impact and the depth of this amazing resource. And it's something I think Durham, you know, it's kind of hard, like you're looking for those kind of shiny moments to be proud of the work that they're doing. And there's so many. This absolutely is one of them. I just wanted to end our time together to talk a little bit with you briefly about Children's Mental Health Week. Every May, the first week of May, is a week to acknowledge children's mental health. And many people don't associate mental health with kids. And just like kids have physical health and we pay attention to it, we know that children have mental health, and we need to be paying attention to that. And I think this week is the week which we as an entire system can put attention to that. And in doing so, we decrease stigma. If we're telling kids it's okay not to be okay and it's okay to ask for help, then we need to do more work around increasing awareness and decreasing stigma, and certainly letting kids know that help is available. So do you remember I talked about, tier 1 all? What I'm going to share with you are some resources to the system that are really about bolstering for every educator their daily practice intentionally this week, with a little nod to what you can do for the rest of the year. And so we're in the midst of developing a promotional video that just will help kind of ground what we're doing and why it's so important. We've got some weekly activities. If you look at the graph, the image on the front, on the top of the page, Mindful Monday, Talk About It Tuesday, Wellness Wednesday, Thankful Thursday, Fitness Friday. We focus each day on a particular theme that are embedded with activities that can support student well-being, mental health. Bingo. It really is a collection of activities that educators can offer to students some choice. What do we want to do today that's going to become the practice of supporting your mental health and well-being? Some of them are practices, some of them are conversation starters, all of them about how to create those caring, welcoming, respectful learning environments for our students where they know that they matter. And if you look at it, if a week is 7 days, there's a lot more squares than 7 on there. And it's an opportunity for educators to keep that resource available for the students as the year unfolds. And then the bottom image is through School Mental Health Ontario, that provincial implementation body I talked about. One of the resources that they recently shared with us is a student mental health action kit. And anyone can go online and look School Mental Health Ontario. It's on its landing page. There are practical resources for educators, there's resources for students, and there's resources for parents and families. And I highly recommend you take a look at that in terms of how you can support your students and support yourself as we navigate the world we currently live in. And so those are resources that we're sharing with all of our educators to create the opportunity to increase practices every day in classrooms across all our schools. I want to end with this because we talk about how important student well-being is. We talk about how important staff well-being is. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about how important your well-being is. I think as much as that message is good for educators, good for our students, it's so vitally important for you as caregivers. We are in this together, partnering through this time in our world's history and in our student, your children's learning journey. And so together we're going to get through this. And as much as we tell our educators, oxygen mask on, it's really hard to build a plane while it's moving in the air. Don't forget to breathe. That applies to you as well. And I think sometimes we need to remember the basics: eat well, sleep well, move well, all the things that take care of our bodies, which in essence take care of our mental health. And then we need to be taking care of our mental health, connect, pause, recognize, reflect, and then do it all over again every day. And so I just want to thank you for this opportunity. I feel really privileged to be here and to share the more than amazing work that's happening here at the school board to support student mental health and well-being. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was fantastic. Does anybody have any questions for Stephanie with respect to her presentation? Darlene, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, and thanks for outlining, the programs and the button. Like, I actually went to our page when you were talking about, and I saw the connect with our mental health team, so I can see it right there. And And I've actually done some reading recently on this topic, is that as stigma and of asking for help, mental health, like as we reduce the stigma, there's a corresponding bump, which is good in requests for services, right? Which is what we want people to ask for help. And I was just wondering, do we have any stats or how long it takes once a need for the supports is identified, how long it takes to connect our students and family with a support?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question because the answer is good news. There isn't a wait. How much that service and what that looks like is determined based on need, but our staff are able to connect with a student as soon as a referral comes forward. As long as it takes for the referral to come in an inbox and someone to make the outreach is the wait time. And it's something that we're, I think is such a wonderful offering for our students, because if you go outside the board, the wait time is something that I don't even think we want to sort of put a number to, because I think we'd all sort of cringe at that. And so I think we're very privileged as a school board to have such a responsive professional services team in our social workers and our psychological services staff. And kudos to the board leadership making a decision to increase the FTE so we have more of those staff who can be more responsive. To your point, exactly, Darlene, there are more kids. And so more kids, more staff, more services, and, better outcomes.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Hey, does anybody have any other questions regarding the presentation tonight? Sorry, Rowan, go ahead.
Yes, so just a question. Again, great presentation, Stephanie. I really appreciate it. Learned some stuff. Whenever I think about this, and I think you touched on it a little bit, I just wanted a bit more clarification. All these are available for the student or the family member to reach out to get that assistance. So that's the active, but from a passive perspective, if the the teachers see someone in need, what does that look like to sort of, grab the lost sheep, so to speak?
That's a really good question, and I'll start, and I'll tag maybe Kyla, who's there with us, if I'm missing anything, because I think she's so well equipped to answer that question. I think more ways than I. But what I can say is, so I think our educators are so tuned into their students that when they become alert to a concern, there's a school team that can begin to have a conversation about how they understand what they see, and then consider what supports are available within the board to mobilize and bring into place to surround that student, provide that support. Kyle, I wonder if you wanted to add a bit more concretes to that.
Rowan, I think I would just add that the bigger pictures around the relationship building that I know that all of our school staff have with their families, and knowing and understanding who they are and what their lived experiences are is a big part in identifying when there may be a shift and a change for a student, because early awareness is a very big important part of being able to respond quickly. So the better we know our students and our families, the more readily we can identify if something's a little bit different than it may have been before. And that's really important in terms of making those connections. So there's a lot of different layers of support, and schools, and I'm sure the principals who are also online with us today may have some specific examples from their schools. But when it comes to any scenario, the relationship building and the understanding of that family then looks at who else is the trusting and caring people that are in their lives in the school building and beyond. And so looking at who may be the best person to sort of initiate any next steps, but then also who else is available to bring in, whether that's the Inclusive Student Services team attached to the school. Sometimes that's Stephanie herself bringing in the mental health lead and looking at what else we can do to respond. And a lot of it has to do with piggybacking on or continuing along the journey of what's already been started. Our schools have all been really focused on mental health for a very long time, but in particular this year, and we know moving into next year, it's going to be even more important than ever before. And so there's a lot of things that are already part of our daily business that may not have been there 5 years ago, let's say. And so there's a lot of layers that we can tap into. And it's also allowed us to build those tiers of support that are so important when supporting mental health. So it depends on that school community and the other layers. There may be a strong presence of a particular supports team or a support group, a community group. So there's lots of layers that would be unique to a school community. But I know that leveraging any and all available supports is key, and acting quickly, especially the more significant we realize the need may be. But also, sometimes we don't know the need is there because it's not obvious. And so that's why it's so important to do the daily work across the entire school. Not all of our students who struggle will have a strong voice or be able to articulate what's happening. And so those daily practices, just like Stephanie was alluding to, that bingo card has well more than 7 days. We're trying to put those, we started off with the first 20 days, we carried on with the additional focus on mental health. Almost every single day there's something happening, and that could be within the classroom itself, that could be school, that could be community, and so all of those layers. And so we want to honor that. We want to support all students in the mental health and well-being, particularly at these challenging times. But I'm not sure if there's a principal colleague who has a specific piece that they'd like to share, but knowing the colleagues on the screen, that's likely.
Hi, Kyla. I'm happy to just mention that I find that the response has been extremely positive and definitely very quick. When, as an administrator within our school, when we're dealing with traumatic events or other issues that come up, when we reach out to board supports, we get a response really fast. And a lot of the time, if there's something that's happened in the community, the staff at the board are very aware of it and reach out to us almost before we're sometimes aware of an event that's occurred, or that we realize that it's connected to our school. In the secondary as well, the schools that have hubs are very fortunate when we are actually in person, and we're working towards other ways to connect, but we have a variety of community partners that we're connected to with those hubs. And I think that having the different voices, the different relationships for kids really makes a difference. And I think that's, definitely what was alluded to through the conversation is the relationship piece, and staff really seeing when there is something that has changed in a student's behavior or their attendance or performance. And we have student success teams as well at the secondary level that meet regularly. And that consists of special education, guidance, our student success teacher, and administration. And we meet regularly to discuss students, and we request information from teachers to let us know if there's any concerns coming up, and we talk about concrete actions and next steps to support them. But all of the resources that have been coming from the board have been very timely and helpful as a school leader to really support our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the main part was I just wanted to make sure that when we've got this system in place, that people, the students who, might be from a mental health perspective are not active to get the help, that we're not leaving them behind. So I appreciate the explanation from everyone.
Okay, thank you. Hi, move on to Claudine.
Hi, thank you for this wonderful presentation. It was very fulsome. My question that I have actually came to me from a group of DDSB teachers that I spoke to, and we were discussing the impact of virtual learning on being able to identify some of these risk factors and concerns. And I've just wondered if we have any feedback on that, and if there has been any training or peer-to-peer conversations so that this is also on the radar for our professionals.
Go ahead, Andrea.
So I'll start that one and then kick it over to our two team members as well. I think one of the important pieces layered in as we built this school year and then rebuilt this school year and rebuilt this school year was some foundational structures that were cross-department and built in some of those conversations and learning. So both the secondary virtual school and the elementary school have leadership teams that meet every single Friday that include innovation, include inclusive student services. And we talk a lot around what are the emergent student needs, what are the educator needs. We tend to have two pockets of educators within DDSB at home, a smaller percentage of experienced teachers, and quite a large cohort of brand new teachers, new to the profession. So there was really that opportunity to build some learning around working alongside clinicians, working alongside different staff members. So there is a professional learning model built into both of those schools where they meet around instructional strategies. So Officer Tim Ralph's team will work around technology. Kyla and I and Michelle both sit at that table as well. So there's specific expertise in secondary and elementary. And then largely we have we've kept the clinical staff on ratio with the students. So as we have at each of those transition points where we've had more students move to virtual than a few back to bricks and mortar, our clinical staffs have made similar moves to make sure that the team support that educators have in bricks and mortar buildings, our teachers who are through DDSB at home also have. So when we speak of resources such as the Addressing Anti-Black Racism Wellbeing Toolkit and psych and social work members coming to staff meetings, not only have they come in for the bricks and mortar schools, but they're also placing that work within DDSB at home. And then Stephanie is a system-wide resource as well and works closely. We're fortunate that the lead superintendent for DDSB at home is Georgette Davis, who had previously the Wellbeing and Mental Health portfolio and has had the privilege also of working closely with Stephanie. So she taps over quite frequently, and well-being and mental health was an absolute foundation from the beginning because that's where Georgette's anchored in terms of whole child well-being. But I don't know if Stephanie or Kai, if you want to speak more specifically around some of the strategies that are in place specific for DDSB at home learners.
I sit on the elementary DDSB at home virtual school leadership team, so they meet weekly, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that mental health and well-being is a focus of every single meeting, and that is only one piece in that the principals of all campuses also connect so that they're getting that same, the leadership team sort of focus in on some of those important awareness pieces and training pieces, and then they bring it back as part of that building capacity of all of the leaders of the different campuses who then take charge of it in terms of the teachers and the staff that they work with. So that's definitely happening. And I know that they have also worked hard to have a number of different release opportunities to focus in on. So if we understand that's a concern, then what are we going to do about it, and working on pieces. They've really worked hard at understanding engagement, and just like we would notice in a bricks and mortar student, when things are shifting and the engagement is maybe declining, the virtual school staff are also focused in on when there's been a change in engagement. And in fact, our focus has very much been on engagement and well-being before anything else, because we know that that has got to be such an important priority. We truly don't know the lived experiences of all of our families who are in virtual or bricks and mortar schools. And so we've been really focusing in on if a child's engagement or attendance is changing, connecting with families, continuing to reach out, continuing to try to understand what their struggles and barriers are, rather than making assumptions or, just marking off attendance as being absent and leaving it alone. So there is definitely a lot of work that's been going in. And I know that any of the work that Stephanie has been doing in terms of system-wide has absolutely taken hold in the virtual campuses as well as the bricks and mortar. So those first 20 days, that happened at virtual campuses, not just bricks and mortar, all those layers. So, and I know she's been working really hard in making sure we're understanding the impact of a virtual environment versus a bricks and mortar, because those needs are different, and adapting some of those strategies or practices, especially if they're identified as a more in-person style of strategy, then we need to have flexibility as to what that might look like in a virtual campus. So I'm not sure if Steph wants to add some specific examples, but I know that there has been an awful lot of work, and we've been very intentionally looking at both branches of bricks and mortar and the virtual schools.
Thanks for that, Carla. I think I'll just give two really simple examples, one more generic and one specific. You know, the resources that I share that we're promoting for mental health, Children's Mental Health Week, and or the campaign that we're doing and putting resources in front of educators, include both what that could look like in an in-person bricks and mortar classroom, as well as what that can look like virtual, and looking at what that looks like at elementary and what that might look like at secondary. So really trying to take these common practices and mapping it onto the context in which they fall, in person or virtual. And so really being mindful of that. I'm going to add a third idea, and I'll start with that one and go to a specific example. I think one of the things that, you know, we really try to support educators is they are experts in developing relationship and connection with students. And that skill doesn't change because you're in person or virtual. It just means that the way in which you might do that might change. And I think sometimes the sort of the modality, in person or virtual, sometimes stands in front. But I think if educators stand in front of that and say, I am a relationship builder who teaches kids, then how that happens in virtual and or how that happens in person becomes something that we plan and work together. Educators at Durham District School Board are relationship builders. They are people connectors. They focus on connection before content, and that looks one way in virtual, but it's happening, and it looks one way in person, and it's happening. The specific example, I know I've mentioned School Mental Health Ontario, and so they've created resources that educators can take and put into a virtual classroom. And so they've created these virtual field trips. They've worked with a organization called OFIA, who focuses on health and phys ed curriculum supports, and they've created actual virtual field trips, of which can happen in person and can be used within a virtual classroom. And so they're available for educators to work with students. And I have one elementary educator that I'm working with that's broken that down for her class, one field lesson over 5 days, every single day. And I think that's actually her effort to make connection, because every day it's an intentional conversation with her students. How are you doing? What's helpful? What do you need from me? How can we get to know each other and build community with each other in our virtual room? That's one educator, but I guarantee you that that's something that's going on with every educator in virtual, because I know for a fact that that's what our virtual administrators are having, those conversations as educators bring that forward. And so we've got a lot of educators committed to really paying attention to the question and answer that you're bringing forward.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for that. We're going to move on to Donna, and then after Donna, if there is any more questions that people have, maybe we could, just keeping in mind time, moving forward, we could send those directly to Andrea through Lisa, and she can get those answers, okay?
Thanks. And I know that our staff does an amazing job when it comes to when there's an incident or a crisis situation, emergency situation, and they go into the school, and I know I get notices, and the staff are right there. And I know the same thing somewhat happens on the DDSB at home. The problem is when something is cross-jurisdictional. So the incident has happened in this community. It happens on a Saturday, and I know that people are there for sure on the Monday morning, the bricks and mortar school, they're all set up and whatever. But parents don't necessarily opt to get notice from the home school. Yet the students still may have, but won't necessarily feel comfortable reaching out to the home school because the home school might not necessarily know or have, any connection to the local community. So I'm just wondering, how do we reach those when there's those crisis moments or whatever that happens in all the resources there? How do we reach those that are at home that are still connected to community somehow because that's their home school, but they don't get those notices if that's saying, hey, to reach out, because the parents have not necessarily opted for those options.
So Eva, through you. So thank you. I would agree that there are some cases where we don't always hit the threads. But when I think through even just the past few weeks, and as you said, we do try and keep trustees apprised of where things are happening. And I would certainly say it has been a rough 3 weeks, this past 3 weeks in our region. For our families, it's certainly. So what we do within our traumatic response protocol, because we always want to anchor back to process so that we don't miss steps, is that school leaders reach out and notify. It comes in through Gary and I for Positive Schools in case there's a safety piece to it, and then myself linking in our Safe Schools officer, as well as Stephanie, Carolyn, and Steve as mental health leads and our communication team. And then we start building a plan with the administrators. Part of our actions is to do, our IT team is phenomenal in helping us out and understanding the time urgency in some of those situations in terms of just being alert and attuned to where students may have witnessed something in their community, where some of them, you're right, are turning on their computer and others are heading into their schools, but they're still in that community witnessing that event. And or where we see multiple events, and I just want to be sensitive that we do have Melissa with us, and one of the 2 recent fires was within the community that Melissa leads as well. So part of our attunement on that was, we have students living in a community, some attending in person, some attending through DDSB at home, who now, from going back to what Stephanie said about all, some, few, there would be specific attunement and response to the students and families most directly impacted, as well as the educators most directly impacted in that relationship. But we were also attuned to the fact that when there's 2 fires fairly closely localized, what is the wonder of worry for all of our kids in that catchment area, both going into virtual and DDSB at home? So there's a reach out with our DDSB at home administrators. We scoop kids' postal codes to know who's in the area. Often too, we're catching the French immersion catchment area as well as our secondary catchment area, because where something can be localized, not all the students even in bricks and mortar attend in that program. We watch the threads to students in special education placements that may be impacted. So I think we're getting better at understanding the threads. And then we work carefully, because what we certainly don't want to do, and Stephanie would be far more eloquent in explaining it from a clinical perspective, is we certainly don't want to be a triggering factor for students, but we want to be attuned and responsive. So we have to tread carefully, right? And even this week, as we dealt with another incident in a community, one of the things that went through the team's minds were, okay, that's a similar grade to this other incident. And so now what happens? Do we have students in that grade at DDSB at home who this is now a second event that they may have witnessed? And so we're certainly watching that. And our staff, still the community circles, the communications, do we catch all of it? No, but are we continually trying to catch those threads? As Michelle said, sometimes our team's reaching out and saying, there's a nexus connection to your school. So could you please just be aware and let us know? Administrators are also phenomenal about reaching out and saying, I'm just having a wonder, or I'm hearing from a staff member or a community member. And then that puts the team on alert as well. So is it a perfect process in terms of its tightness and being fully encompassing? No, we're building it as we go. But is the team sensitive to communities now have students going in a number of directions for their learning, who may have a common experience or even relationships, right, with other students? And so what we have been doing is making both teams aware, both the in-person bricks and mortar team, as well as the clinical support teams to DDSB at home. The structure for DDSB at home also has 2 lead administrators, and we queue them in so that they can talk to the administrators in the various campuses just to be alert and listening as well. And then the same parallel supports for staff. In terms of the EFAP support programs and offerings, we want to make sure that staff that are working at home isolated don't feel further isolated when they're managing, both for themselves and their students. I don't know, Stephanie, if you want to add anything, or if that you would do a much smoother job of describing it than I do, but
however, I think you did a fantastic job, Andrea. And I think one of the things, the only thing I would add to that is there's a parallel process where the mental health leadership team, myself, Steve and Carolyn, for administrators and staff in terms of some guidance, we often provide some preamble, some words, some consideration. And so while that communication and that process of connection is happening at a system level, looking at schools and the interconnection and the intersection of the lives of our students and the event that we're dealing with, we also provide educators and administrators with content information. And so if we need to unpack something that's difficult with a group of, let's say, grade 4 students, here's some language that you might want to consider. Here's some things you might want to be alert to. And then really kind of help if it's tied to something like grief, for example, here are some considerations and here are some sentence prompts so that educators who themselves might be dealing with their own emotional reaction have some guideposts along the way for those very important and often difficult conversations.
Hey, thank you so much. Appreciate all those answers and questions. We are going to move on now then to the staff reports, starting with the administration report.
Thank you. So it'll be fairly brief this evening. So as you've heard this evening, well-being, mental health, and learning are all intertwined. And our team really feels privileged to be able to support students in all of these areas. Our students continue to amaze us and challenge us to our most creative thinking in individualizing their school experiences. Next week, the system takes a breath. Although classrooms will not be active, we do have safety nets that have been put in place for students and key processes, such as linked to our most recent conversation thread on traumatic response, should it be needed next week. But students, families who are able, and staff will all take a collective pause next week, and we really feel that this is important for everyone's well-being. Over the past couple of weeks, we've experienced yet another set of changes in education, with a number of our in-person schools switching to virtual for periods of 2 weeks. Durham Region Health Department directs us when in-person class dismissals or whole school switches to virtual are necessary due to COVID. And we thank our students, families, and our staff for continuing to navigate all of these changes. Yesterday, the ministry announced that staff supporting students with special education needs are now eligible for the COVID vaccination, along with all education staff on the horizon for that eligibility. We'd like to thank our DDSB trustees, Director Marsh, and our union partners for their advocacy efforts in achieving this important milestone in our COVID journey. As we meet tonight, school principals are verifying their staff lists for all individuals eligible under the Supports for Students with Special Education Needs umbrella. And although we believe that all staff are important to our students, the scope at this time is limited to those in the roles providing the most direct support. And so this includes all of our educational assistants, all special education class teachers, all administrators, CERTs, interpreters, interveners, hearing and vision resource staff. Our clinicians qualified a couple weeks ago when regulated health professionals became eligible at that point. And the majority of those teams have partaken in the vaccination process. So staff will soon, they'll be going out tomorrow, be provided with letters through our HR team for them to move through the booking system. And we're hoping that those vaccination appointments will all occur next week. A reminder of the opportunity for SEAC feedback. Our Inclusive Student Services team will soon commence updates on the special education plan. So we have emailed out that direct link, and also the document can be found on the DDSB website. And we're just asking that if there is feedback on what you would like us to see as improvements to the plan and how that communicates to and faces community, we're asking for that by the end of this month, please. So this continues to be a challenging school year for everyone. What is strong within that is our commitment to community and to each other with centering human rights and equity. And I think you saw that woven through each of the topics that's already come up this evening and certainly in the ones ahead. So always with keeping children and youth at the core as we're privileged to support them. This is our administrator's report for April.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any questions for Andrea with respect to the administrator's report? No? Okay, then we will move on then to our board report.
Thank you. Just on that note, I don't know, yes, the Board of Trustees did write a letter to the Health, Durham Regional Health, and to ensure that our staff members did receive the vaccine. I don't know whether we can say that we're totally we're very efficient, because it was like the next day almost something that we heard that was what was going to happen. But also note that anybody living in Ajax and Pickering, considered as hotspots, are also eligible, particularly in the list as well. And they've made it, I think the age limit is 60. So I was just saying earlier that I was fortunate I got there on that thing, and I've got my vaccine first shot tomorrow. So it's work. It is happening. And I also know that, from parents' perspective, I have a large community of people that I know with people with intellectual disabilities who have been getting their vaccinations as well, because that has been extended. What is interesting, because I also know quite a few through my Special Olympics liaisons, and that there's quite a few people in other health units, even though it specifically says intellectual disability, it gives the example of Down syndrome, it's not happening in other health units. Where they're allowed to get their vaccines. So it's really interesting, but Durham is doing what they're doing. And I think also on that note, just as far as the latest, as you know, basically Peel and Toronto have basically, their health units have basically declared a total board shutdown. And where our numbers are getting up there of positivity rates. However, at this point in time, we haven't seen anything, and the fact that we are going into break, I don't expect to see anything. This is my personal opinion. I don't expect to see anything about Durham closing down after the break. We have got notice that memo has gone out to boards around ensuring deep cleaning is going to happen, and the protocol coming back after break as well. And, the deep cleaning is going to happen, renewed training and efforts into safety protocols, etc. So that's basically where we know where that's going. As far as what's happening else at the board, we had, I think it was 8 presentations around the French as a second language from parents in the community and some organizations around the proposed, the various options of the French as a second language changes, and particularly most of it was focused on the French immersion at this point in time. And because of the ensuring, most of the comments were around not delaying the start, the entry to, or extending the entry to a later grade. They wanted it, you know, to keep it as young as possible, the earliest grades as possible, as well as in keeping the instructional time as it is. So the board is supposed to be making the final report will be coming to board in another 2 weeks, and the board will make a decision. It's going to be an interesting conversation, but I can honestly say that, and again, this is Trustee Donna Edwards' comment, and my opinion is that the amount of input into this, I feel that, because I'm hearing it on the same thing, we go later on talking about online, future of online education, is that the amount of input from parents is not as great as it would be if they were in the bricks and mortars of schools, that their parents are too busy listening and worrying about their children and COVID and their family's health and safety and their own mental health. So it's going to be very interesting. As well as we had a presentation on the elementary math plan for the new math curriculum, and an update as far as DDSB at home. We also looked at Indigenous student achievement data, as well as achievement data for DDS online learning. And I think if you go, I'm trying to find it, in that particular report, it talks, we have achievement data for Q1 and Q2 for in-home, in-person and online learning. And one of the comments I personally looked is more on the percentage of, what was it? Trying to find the actual report here, and I can't find it. Remediation is almost in a lot of times double. So I still have some concerns on that, what that it looks like from the different exceptionalities. Is that how successful are there? And also for the non-credit bearing courses, how successful were our students from special education? And not only compare, I know it's difficult, especially at the secondary level, because you've got 4 quarters, whereas previously pre-COVID, it was basically 3 trimesters. So just seeing what our achievement rates are and the issues between, you know, pre-COVID and now, if we could, like, even the number of credits, the level of achievement 1 to 4, and the resources that we have to expend. I'm just still very concerned because I know our staff have worked really hard because the achievement levels seem to be the same. Before COVID, to Q1 and Q2, but it seems like we've had to put a lot more staff effort in order to do that. And our staff work really, really hard, and kudos to them to do that they still managed to have the achievement level being the same. But I still really concerned on resources, et cetera, especially when we're looking at the next fiscal year and having less funding being provided to us around COVID resources or extra resources. So that's just a bit of a concern. And we also had some draft updates to a trustee's expense policy and the community use of schools policy. Particularly, there's a whole section that around human rights and equity and so forth in those particular policies as well. Which we are trying to review. Reviewing the policies are cyclical. It's supposed to be every 5 years, but we're trying to ensure that we go through all our policies and look at it from an equity and human rights perspective. Of course, we had actually our report from the Equity and Diversity Ad Hoc Committee. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Donna. Is there any questions for Donna with respect to the board's report? Oh, okay. Then we can move on to our open discussion period regarding our building relationships for open communication regarding IEPs and IPRCs. As a reminder was sent around, the link was resent with respect to the JAM board and sent a reminder on the weekend for any additions to it, which we did receive some from Autism Ontario, my Association for Bright Children, and sorry, just scrolling through here, Ontario Association of Families of Children with Communication Disorders, as well as from Member at Large Craig Cameron. And I believe that is all that we received. So, Sensa, do you want to speak to the contributions that you added to the JAM board?
I can. Just let me see if I can pull it back up. I think I closed it out. Can you share the screen? If you share the screen, nobody is allowed to judge me on my spelling and grammar, even though I'm in a room full of teachers or ex-teachers.
I see point form, so it doesn't count. Andrea, are you able to share the JAM board? Yeah. Oh, I see you shared the link.
Kyla, do you want to open it up or do you want me to?
I have it open. I can go ahead and do it.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you.
No problem.
And for those that want to drive on screen, popped it into the chat box as well, just in case you want to control scrolling for yourself.
Okay, so the first point that I thought of was equal access. And what I mean by that is I'm not talking about equity. I'm talking about equal access from school to school. Doesn't matter what administrator I have or what teacher I have, the access to the IEP and how it's implemented is the same, right? And I think that starts with a top-down kind of model where we're reviewing the IEP and best practice with the administrators at PD days. I would also like to say that if half of these things are already in implementation, they're still my ideas, so I'm sharing them, okay? At those meetings, we also like to celebrate successes because we know when we are encouraging with people and we show them that we're happy with their efforts, they do more of the same. Whatever you focus on will increase. We want to really celebrate that relationship, communication, relationship parity that was shared last month, because I really do believe that it's relationships that will solve a problem when things go wrong, never mind when things are all going right, right? In the online modules that I've heard talked about for educators, we're hoping that there is an IEP review in that module so that it's reviewing not only the steps of what to do, but also the best practices, those little small tips and tricks that build the communication and the relationship. I think that we need to start going back to looking at our IEPs for those measurable goals and seeing if we're meeting our measurable goals. And if we're not meeting them, is it within the expectation? Is it within the strategy? Is it just time and space, right? But why, right? So that we can make those adaptations moving forward. So we don't have children that are using the same goals year after year. We want our administrators to be able to support their frontline staff with the goals in the IEP. And that's not just by getting the board supports, which are a big help, right? But also by doing little things like check-ins or drive-by celebrations. I see you're using that first and then board, and it's working. Great job, right? So we want to make some of it informal and natural in the day-to-day of school. And I truly believe that if it's administrators are leading this kind of a model, then everybody else will just kind of fall into place. I also thought about how to increase contribution and collaboration, right? Some people are using communication books, some people aren't using communication books. I think that there should be some informal communication about when IEP milestones are met. Don't wait for the report card to put the check in the right box, but send home and say, we did the first and then board and he tied his shoes before he went outside, whatever the goal was. I think we should be pre-planning our scheduled check-in meetings with the IEP, with our families and our administrators. So we are very good about scheduling the IEP meeting or the case conference to plan the next year. But I think we should just already build it in. Hey, we're going to do a check-in at the end of November to review IEP comment strategies. And that check-in can be done in many different ways because we have all this technology here. It could be virtual, it could be in person, it could be a phone call, it could be an email, but that's that relationship thing to know our families and how best that they receive the information. I think all our families that are doing e-blast, doing IEP should be like on a communication list so that we can have e-blasts that are geared towards them, that have information about IEPs and resources and current IEP information to remind parents about the collaboration that's already built into the process. I think that we need to be reminding parents about the resources of IEPs a few times a year and not just when our IEP comes out. I also think those resources should be included when we give the IEP for the parents' input, right? So that they also have those resources on hand when they're filling out their own collaboration portion to review in their own time. As we always do, share community agency resources and links because a lot of community agencies are sharing the same types of information, IEP best practices. So sometimes we don't have to be the only ones sharing the information. And I think it's important that we get feedback from families. I know last month I said that if we have a survey or evaluation process done on IEPs, but then my brain also thought of this imaginative idea where we could have exit surveys when they're moving from grade 6 or moving from grade 8 or exiting high school, where families are talking. These are families that may have had years of experience working with different teachers and administrators, and they may be able to give some great recommendations and solutions for moving forward. So those are my brainstorms, grammar and misspelling included.
Thank you so much, Sansa. That's actually some great ideas in there. I really like a lot of them, especially that exit survey. I think that's huge. The next selection of slides is actually the Association for Bright Children, which I can speak to. I think that's slide 6. There we go. One of the things, as a rep for the Association for Bright Children, I hear a lot back from parents because there's a lot of misunderstanding within that grouping of children about their capabilities and their needs. And what a lot of people don't understand or don't know is that about 20% of all gifted children have an alternate identification. And ADHD and autism are very high on that list of alternate identifications within our grouping of children. And many parents with children with those invisible disabilities struggle year to year to sort of re-educate teachers on that invisible disability and what may be perceived as behaviors is actually a disability. So moving IEPs through 1 year to the next, or semester to semester in high school, it's really important for those teachers across the board, not just in a gifted program, but in every level, every grade and every stream, that they really review those IEPs and talk to teachers and find out, what some things that they maybe should be looking for the children moving into the next grade or to the next semester. The other thing, transition plans for twice exceptional children, especially kids with a gifted identification as well as an alternate identification, is the transition planning for those children doesn't tend to be taken as seriously in a lot of cases unless there's a lot of severe behavioral issues. It just tends to be treated more or less like a typical IEP meeting, with sort of representatives from the high school there. But we do really have to look at the individual child in those groups and ensure that their transition planning for those children is really considered on an individual basis and not just the assumption that because they're bright, they will be fine. Because many of them, especially if there's anxiety involved, which is another big aspect to a gifted identification, those children can really struggle, especially within the first year into high school, as a result of that. So that's something that I would like to see looked at. And then I guess more so into the high school, I think, because teachers tend to teach different streams. I think, especially within the gifted and the academic grade levels, I think there needs to be an understanding of the obligation of the implementation of those IEPs in each of those streams, and that not to understand that, the goal is for all children to meet their potential, not some sort of baseline potential, but their potential. And if a child is struggling, the answer should not be to drop stream down, especially when we know they have the ability to be where they are. They just need some supports. And I think that's a big one. And I think one other one part of that is really important is if there ever is a recommendation for a child to move down a stream, that should never appear in a report card. And it has in a teacher's comments in a grade level at the end of at the end of a semester or whatever, and they get the report cards. That's a type of communication that needs to only ever be directed, verbally between parent and school. Because for a child's perspective, seeing something like that is devastating to their emotional well-being. So those are just some of my thoughts with respect to sort of the IEP and IPRC and sort of that transition between grade to grade and semester to semester. The other addition we have is for the Ontario Association for Families of Children with Communication Disorders. And so I'd like Elizabeth to speak to that one.
So I tried to approach this. What I did was that I was thinking of it mostly as my own personal experiences. And I think the goal I had in mind in overarching this is that I want this to be seen, the IEPs to be seen as like a living, breathing tool, as how does it look on the ground every day? How can we shape this day to day to help each child achieve the best that they can and feel good about their experiences? Now, some of this stuff, as I said, draws from my personal experience. So I said, make note of strengths as well as areas needing support. and don't give the impression that this child is difficult or a problem to be solved. I feel like you want a lot of back and forth communication between parents and children and teachers. And if it's overwhelmingly like, how are we going to fix this problem? Then that kind of shuts down the communication. You want to keep it positive and say, these are some really great things that are happening too. Provide that encouragement. Encourage parents to be active in the school community. So personally, I've also found that the more familiar that I seem to the staff on site, and the more kind of chit chat conversation that happens, then the easier that communication flows. The more information I have about what accommodations are available, what activities are happening in the classroom, how can I then think about applying the general strategies that are in my child's IEP into those specific activities, and thinking about, as I said, making it living and breathing. And then making an effort to maintain regular check-in and communication. So I think Claudine touched on this, like maybe we don't wait specifically for the IPRC meetings. So this if there's some significant event, making sure that communication is still happening, even between progress reports or IPRCs. And then ask specific questions like, what happens at home if in this situation, what do you do that helps? So both ways, like the teachers can ask the parents what helps with your child in this situation. Parents can ask teachers, what are you doing? And very specific. So it's like kind of that meshing of the general information in the IEP and applying it into those specific situations, as I was saying. So I don't know that I was talking about necessarily specifically speech and language or communication disorders. I was kind of just thinking overall general, how do you accommodate and improve that communication relationship, and really reinforce that this is a dynamic tool.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah. Okay, and sort of the next slide was actually from member at large, I believe. This was from Craig, who has sent his regrets today. So unfortunately isn't here to speak to it himself. It largely was sort of a breakdown of a parent's experience with the transition meeting from grade 8 to grade 9. And I'm not sure really how to speak to this myself. I don't know whether or not, maybe we'll ask Craig if he wants to speak to it under community concerns the next time, or whether or not Andrew would rather reach out to him personally with respect to this sort of experience. But it essentially, it boils. Sorry, Andrea, go ahead.
We can, sorry to interrupt, we can follow up with him in between and then follow his guidance on his preference.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Essentially, boils down to that transition meeting from grade 8 to grade 9, and understanding how very important that meeting is for the child and for the parent, and making sure that whatever time is carved out directly for that meeting and nothing else. And the other item on that list was actually to provide a template for new family to write a letter of introduction to key members of the special needs circle of care, teachers, CERTs, principal, etc. Hi, my name is, and I. Which is actually not a bad idea to do, and it's something that can maybe easily then be adapted for year to year. That is everything that came in on the Jamboard, and just being respectful of everybody's time and the fact that we had sent that around to get as much input as possible. I don't know if there's any questions specifically to those comments that anybody has. If not, I would think that that would be the end of that sort of discussion period. Donna, I see your hand up.
I just want to make one comment as I was listening, and I purposely didn't go on the Jamboard because I really saw this as for the associations and the parents to put their comments in, and it's your lived experience in your communities as far as lived experience, and I wanted to hear what you had to say, but one of the things that some of the words that I heard basically was fixing a problem. Basically changing an IEP so that it reflects the needs of the child, understanding the child's needs, learning needs, and listening to those communications. And one of the things, and I know Andrea knows this right now, that I really believe, because the education system is really built on a medical model, and our teachers are taught the medical model. But it really is an understanding of ableism. And that, what ableism is basically it looks at, basically that typical abilities are higher than others. And that, the other stereotypes that still exist, when Eva talks about when, people don't understand that 20% of people who are gifted also have a comorbidity. And so when and it's okay to take your experience and use it as somewhat as a starting point, but it's really important to get to know the student and their abilities. And it's from your perspective, because even from year to year, and I'm not trying to put negative lights on teachers, but their experiences are different, but also the child is changing, the environment is changing. So their needs might change as well. Their home situation might have changed. It's constantly changing. And so we have to be really reflective of what their needs are, and that communication, as the communication book, that little communication book is really key. And I think Elizabeth said it, the more I'm present in the school, those little conversations really help me understand, or help the staff understand. And it's taking those moments to do that. And it's really important. But it's again that individual, and we've made that a focus, but what that individual means is it's an individual person before the disability too, because each person, doesn't matter if they have a label, are very different, and everybody should take a look at it from a fresh and say, okay, this is what is listed, but tell me about your child. Tell me what you think tell me if there was anything that happened over the summer. So that touch-in in November that somebody suggested is really key. So they're really great suggestions, but it really comes down as really the connection there and keeping those relationships and how we go about it. So those best practices that were mentioned is really key.
Thank you, Donna. Just keeping in mind time and having, I know that Tara has a hard deadline today of 8 o'clock, and I'm just hoping that she can quickly tell us about her moving on to the business of rising from the minutes, about your deputation to the regarding education finance.
Yeah, I can do that. It was online. It was virtual as per everybody else is going. We were the only deputation, I think, again, as we usually are. So I sent the presentation around, so I don't know if anybody had a chance to sort of see it, but essentially it was, given that we didn't actually have a draft budget to review and then provide input and feedback on that, it was, as Donna had sort of explained last time, that it was really sort of an opportunity for us to sort of say, hey, don't forget about these areas and where our concerns are sitting. So I actually went and looked at last year's presentation because, again, the whole process was a little topsy-turvy with delays in the numbers and everything else with, middle of COVID. And looking at it, I sort of went, it's basically the same. Same things still didn't change. And then sort of with some feedback from a few folks, thank you for that. Just saying, what are some of the new things that are sort of showing up because of where we are and this past year in COVID. So that's what what it was really sort of focused on was, we still need to make sure that, even though we know we're probably not going to get a new set of funding for a pandemic, we still need to make physical and mental health a priority, as we've just, we've talked a lot about today. A lot of those other different sort of things like the flip-flop of we're in lockdown, we're not in lockdown, we're in gray zone, we're in red zone, oh no, we're back in lockdown again. And then people flip-flopping back and forth to in-home and in person. And that requires additional transition supports for a lot of our students. Rowan, I was thinking a lot of our students with potentially learning disabilities in terms of how on earth do we accommodate when all of a sudden it's like, and we don't know where we're going to be next week. And wondering what those modifications look like. And I know, trying to write an IEP when you have no idea what that accommodation might look completely different if you're virtual versus if you're in person, if you're in a small class. And then I know we had a lot of different things coming in this year with, it looks like we're getting a lot of influx of people from other regions. I guess we do really good work here, and Durham's not a bad place to live. So, but a lot of those students have needs, have small class placements and specialized programming already. Now it's an additional influx of students. So we're stressing our already stressed system. So how are we going to handle those? Andrea, I think we had mentioned the capacity building for our practical learning program in the secondary schools to say, how are we going to build capacity in our teachers for the new programs, and just with the need for that program is starting to drive. It looks like it's a program that the outcomes out of that one are particularly conducive for a lot of our families and for our students for their success. And how do we get that capacity through the system so that everyone has access? So I think those were the big ones. So yeah, that's really sort of where we're going. Like, hey, let's hope for the resources and the funding for it, which we don't know yet. So I think, Donna, we're supposed to be getting numbers sometime soon-ish. You laughing. And then I guess we get, there's another round sometime in May, supposedly. I don't know if we're going to get another shot at some feedback, but we had also put in the request to allow us to sort of stay in touch and keep that collaboration and allow us to provide that input and oversight as the process continues throughout the rest of the year. That was it.
Thank you, Tara. I greatly appreciate that. I know Tara has to run, so maybe if anybody has questions for Tara, you can send them through myself and Lisa, and we can forward them on to Tara so that she can run. Thank you so much for doing that. You're a superstar. You've done it for a number of years now. We really appreciate that.
No problem. Team effort.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I got a duck.
Okay.
See you later.
Thanks. See you.
Breaking my phone. Okay, bye.
And then we're going to move on to under this same section onto Sensa. We had asked her to take some questions back to Autism Ontario with respect to the OAP program, and she has an update for us. So,
hi. We had many emails back and forth for me to get these answers, but just this afternoon, we got our response, so I'm happy to share. They did comment on the 600 persons pilot program. They reminded us that this is a pilot program. It's not a lottery system for our families to access their services, but it is a pilot program. They don't know what's going to happen with the pilot after. They don't know if it's going to be beneficial. That's what they're looking for the feedback from those 600 families. They have not yet selected those 600 families, but they had to have applied as of March 31st, 2021. if they are applying after March 31st, they are still eligible for one-time funding and foundational family services. This information will be included in the minutes because there's also a link that was sent so that families can access those resources. They did state that they can't comment on the care coordinators at all. And that was our question about the gatekeepers of the money. I had added my own comment because after our meeting, I fell into a rabbit hole about the gatekeepers of our finances. And if that's what our families are Googling, it's not a good thing. I would like to suggest this though, moving forward. We felt that it would be great if I, the representative for Autism Ontario, could approach Autism Ontario with a question. And it seemed to be to create more confusion in what am I allowed to say, what am I allowed to do, right? So I suggest that if this concern, especially the concern about the families who are waiting and still feel like they are on a hold pattern, and the gatekeepers of the financial money, because I read many, many comments and reviews from past families, and it was all concerns and cautionary tales. Oh, a bleeding heart. So I believe that if we really want some more fulsome answers, that we should take a more formal approach, and either it's a letter or an email, but the communication also comes from the president of SEAC as well, so that our voices are heard.
Great, thank you so much. So are you suggesting we do a letter to the ministry for that, or to Autism Ontario for those questions?
I'm not, well, we know that the ministry leads Autism Ontario, so I believe that because it's about Autism Ontario, we'd have to CC them on the letter as well.
Right.
But I think we need to decide as a group together how important this cause and concern is. Maybe even Andrea can talk about how many families are being affected in the DDSB by this, so that we know how many families we're representing by writing the letter and moving forward. Yeah.
Andrea, yeah, go ahead.
So I think really in support of Claudine's recommendation in terms of an inquiry going to the power broker for OEP, which is MCCSS, in terms of the ministry that's driving the scope of changes or the pause on changes. I do fully acknowledge, I believe when the first announcement came out and the linkage to Autism Ontario, it was with an organizational surprise for that linkage. So I do believe that the responsibility as well as the information holder is actually MCCSS at a provincial level within Ontario. In terms of the numbers of families impacted, part of the challenge of the OEP is it's a challenge for us to figure out how many families are in which cycle of the funding, how many are on the wait list. We actually don't have access to how many of our families are on a wait list or in any part of the service sequence because of it's not deemed to be part of their educational information and data. We tend to feed provincial data up rather than data come to us or across ministries. I think part of our concern as well is not only for students who are already in the education system, who may be on the wait list or held in different parts of the process, but also our little ones coming in. So we know that the ratio of diagnoses, as well as the and clinicians are learning about ASD and presentation in females. There's a kind of a wave coming, and what we're trying to do is continue as well. So we could use numbers of students who have a diagnosis of ASD that's translated over to an IPRC with that as the exceptionality, but it'd be really, really challenging. I think even for any of our community partners, either through SENSA or even through partners like Lake Ridge and Kinark and things like that, because we're essentially, there's a bit of a wall to that information and how it lands locally. I can reach out to a couple partners just to see if they have some insights or any data within their organization of scalability of how many kids are approaching or trying to move into service. Lake Ridge Community Support Services would be a large partner for that. But part of the concerns with OAP is it's held somewhere, and the applications go into a machine, and our families aren't getting information, and we certainly don't. Families require information first. So I would love to be able to provide you with concrete data, but part of the machine is that we don't know.
So it sounds to me like you'd like to make a motion, Sensa.
Yes, I would like to make a motion.
Okay.
That we move forward on a formal inquiry to MCSS.
Okay. Anyone want to second that? Donna? All in favor? Okay, motion passed. Excellent. The letter would go out from myself as chair, but would you be interested in taking a stab at drafting that? Just because you have more background knowledge to it, and I'd want it to get the, to make sure it is exactly what we need to get across.
Okay, so I have never drafted a letter to MCSS in my life, right? But I'm willing to take a stab at it, especially Eva, if you know, I have drafts of some of the other letters that we've had before. And Andrea, if you could just confirm that I represented our concerns appropriately in the email.
Thank you. So through you, Eva, absolutely. So I think our concerns were just seeking further information in terms of the context for our kids and families. And you absolutely did a beautiful job of representing that inquiry. So thank you. Also happy to put myself and some staff members into that letter writing as well, if that would be helpful to both yourself and the committee. Would be happy, I think, particularly our autism resource team and some of our BCBAs and our speech path on that team have a particular skill and experience to be framing some inquiries. So happy to provide you with some staff support as well.
Yeah, that would be great. And I would also say to that, as far as the form, I'm just looking for the body of the letter. If you want me to format that for you and find the right contacts and stuff, that's what I do. So I'm happy to assist in that way. But if you could draft a base letter that we can review and bring forward for our next meeting, that would be fantastic.
I can do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And the other item under business arising from the minutes is the response. So we sent out our letter. I didn't receive any extra feedback, so we finalized the letter to Metrolinx and sent it out on the 15th. As did the Board of Trustees send a letter as well, similar to ours, raising the concerns. And Donna and I participated. It got some attention. And Donna and I participated in a Zoom meeting with representatives from Metrolinx and from Durham Transportation and our planning department. And Donna, was there anybody else there outside? Was there somebody from the ministry there?
No, it was Durham Region Transportation, but it was all their accessibility as well as Metrolinx's
communications
group. Yeah.
And their VP, I believe, was also there.
Yeah, there was a VP. I think he was accessible. It was quite heavily loaded with Metrolinx, but it was Durham Region. It wasn't their transportation. It wasn't Durham Region Transportation Services. It was their Rapid Transit Planning Group.
Yes. Yeah. So Donna and I can speak to it both sort of from our perspectives. That it seemed to have gotten the attention, and I think it raised issues that they hadn't considered, and they sort of committed to including these, this feedback into their planning process, because apparently it's sort of in the initial stages. And they also indicated that moving forward, there would be sort of committees formed for implementation, and there was an invite that if we were interested in being part of those committees, that we could join that. And then Donna also managed to get some attention, I think, for Durham Transit with respect to their accessibility transit. So Donna, you want to add anything?
Yeah, because I think that a lot of the focus was on physical disabilities as far as their accessibility plan. It wasn't on other disabilities, and I particularly brought up possible issues that will arise from people with intellectual disabilities as an example. And so that's where, and then the interlinks between Metrolinx and Durham Region Transit. And that's where it almost became apparent that their rapid transit group from Durham Transit Department, the transportation department, didn't talk to Durham Region Transit. It became kind of, it was kind of interesting because they weren't quite aware of that. Just so you know, I also sent the copies of SEAC's letter to the Accessibility Committee in the town of Ajax, as well as I was then referred also to the Accessibility Committee with the town of Whitby, and they were quite pleased to receive those letters as well. So it did garner attention. The next step, there was supposed to be a continued another discussion between staff and staff on issues around transportation and that particular section of planning. They did say that it wasn't 100%, but they definitely recognized the transit issue, and there would be consideration around busing along that route.
Yeah, it was a very positive meeting. Almost from the beginning, I think they signaled that they took it seriously. So that was great. It's nice to write a letter that actually seems to move something along. So that was great. Does anybody have any questions with regards to that? If we hear anything more with respect to implementation committees or whatever, we'll bring that forward to SEAC as well. Okay, moving on then to association reports. I can confirm that we did not receive any association reports this month. And then the next item is the correspondence. I know there was letters from Superior Greenstone District School Board that mirrored our concerns with respect to the UDL and accessibility in e-learning. And we received a response from the ministry with respect to our letter. And I'd like to congratulate Andrea on her position as chair. They sort of, indicated that they, recognize the importance of universal design and ensuring that all, sort of basically saying the goal is to ensure that everything aligns with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and welcoming ongoing support and feedback and leadership from SEAC, for what that's worth. But that will tie into something a little later that Donna will talk about under community concerns. And the most important piece of correspondence we received is from Easter Seals, Ontario, naming Christina Salisbury, putting forth Christina Salisbury as the SEAC alternate for Easter Seals, because Claire Parent, I think her name was, has stepped back from that role. I don't know if everybody's taken a look at the letter, but it confirms that Christine is a parent of a child attending the DDSB. She is a Canadian citizen over the age of 18. She resides within the jurisdiction of the board and is a public board supporter. Christina is not an employee of the board. Does anybody have any questions with respect to the nomination? If not, can we have a motion to accept Christina Salisbury as the alternate SEAC rep for Easter Seals, Ontario? Donna, seconded by Elizabeth. All in favor? Okay, motion passed. And oops, I've lost my agenda. There we go. Then we can move on to community concerns. Yeah.
Eva, can I just talk about that? And again, because board minutes are always late, and just make sure that it's a recommendation to the Board of Trustees to, because it's the Board of Trustees that actually approve the appointments, right? So the recommendation of SEAC is to approve whatever, and that we make that go forward, so that we don't have this 2 months wait before a person can attend a meeting. Okay. So can we get a motion then to recommend that the board, to move that forward to the board for acceptance at their next meeting? Yeah. Elizabeth, seconders? Carolyn, all in favor? Okay, excellent. We will move on to community concerns, and I'm going to pass that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Andrea.
Just ask a clarification of the committee. So, Donna, will you move that through Kathy, or would you like me to move that through for inclusion in the board package for the April meeting?
Usually Diane used to just smooth it on there, so at least if you could get it right through, it's a lot easier.
And I will do that, and then you and Darlene will know that it will be in the package when you receive it, I believe, next week. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Donna, do you now want to discuss that video that you sent earlier to myself?
Yeah, I'm just so you know, and I'm sure you might have seen some in the newspaper about the discussion around online learning, the future in Ontario, and that there was an article in, I believe it was the Toronto Star, about it from Alonzo. What's her first name? She's the
Globe and Mail.
Globe and Mail. Anyways, and Carolyn Alfonso, that's her name. I always remember her last name, but never remember her first name. So what it was, basically, it was about a presentation that was made to some education partners on March 22nd about a proposal about online learning. And that presentation did happen. However, the document itself was considered confidential, and it hasn't, obviously from that article it was leaked, but however we're still embargoed on not releasing that information. So I'm going to relate what was in that article from that perspective, but what I could say is there. And basically the proposal was the government's on how they see the continued choice of online learning for Ontario. Further to that, there was the agenda with Steve Paikin had a discussion with actually Carolyn Alfonso, Annie Kidder from People of Education, as well as Michael Barber, who's actually a Canadian, but a professor of an instructional design in education and health service in Turos University in California. But they had a discussion about the online future. I highly recommend people talk to it. But the common concern on there was that the government is moving ahead on this whole online learning, and it's a system, and changes to the education and how it's delivered with. I can honestly say, Anna Kidder, all three of them have said, we're proceeding on a fairly rapid pace with this, with really no true public consultation, because some of the information hasn't been released because it's still confidential. And that it's also being done in a time where parents are busy with worrying about just their education and just getting them through and staying health and safety. And that a plan, they should really look at what is happening and look at the data and actually do an analysis of what's happening with online learning. And one of the comments that the associate professor said from California was that what we're doing is pandemic programming. He called it pandemic programming. Is not the same as one of the statements that I thought was pretty funny was that TVO has been in the business of online learning for 100 years. So I thought that was an interesting statement at the very beginning. Although they did say that when it was done online before, it was really just correspondence learning. But I thought that was an interesting comment. But it's it's definitely concerning on the direction that things are going. I will send out I gave the link to, I don't know if you have it, was also in the media reports, I think. Andrea, I don't know if you saw it as well, but I will send the link out. And it's really a concern because the direction that it is moving, we already know, and this is where the data needs to be collected. And somehow when we talk achievement results and some of the issues that, that students with special needs, and the online learning is there's going to be some huge issues because there's already gaps right now that we know of. There's issues around which we've always identified as far as the accessibility to material, cultural relevant pedagogy. There's a whole slew of things that we already know around TVO. And I could honestly say that in the budget discussions, there's $40 million going to TVO. That was in the budget release. Okay, so I'm not saying anything that isn't. All I'm just going to say there's $40 million. There's a new direction set out in this document. That has been said as well. So I think it's really a high concern for everybody, not only for students with special needs, but especially for students with special needs. So I'll send that out. And then if we want to maybe make some comment.
Darlene, I see you have your hand up to add to that. So
yeah,
go ahead.
And I want to thank Donna and can't remember if it was Patrice and Michael. It was the OPSPA, our OPSPA representatives who brought that forward to the Board of Trustees. And yeah, we're limited on what we can say in terms of the details, but there is a leak out there. So there is the Globe and Mail report that's out there. I would highly encourage you to share this article with your community groups to make sure they're all aware of it and can advocate as well, because yeah, it's I mean, it's a bit of a Pandora's box. We know that this online transition and for the world of work, as well as education, as well as how public governments conduct business, there's been some very good things in terms of transparency that have come out of this, but there's also some very concerning trends. So thanks for bringing that up, Donna. I think it's really important that as many people are aware of where we might be trending as a province in education.
So Eva, I will send 3 links. One is the TVO, one is the article from Carolyn Afonso, the original article. Actually, if you look at the TVO one, there's a little bit more information that was released by one of the individuals I thought was interesting. So it's a good thing to do as far as that was concerned. And then as well as the Ontario Public School Board Association's response to the original TVO consultation that was done in December. So that will give you, and then actually there's a 4th link. There's another one that has basically an additional link where it has some of the things that they see, some of the issues around the way it's modeled.
Thank you, Donna. Appreciate that. Yeah, if you could send all of those links around, and then what I would propose is that we bring this around again next meeting to discuss. Then once everybody's had a chance to review the links, read the articles, watch the video, that maybe we bring this back around for conversation to decide whether or not as a committee we want to sort of take the information that's public and do a letter to the ministry around that, sort of, getting in there early and making it clear where our SEAC stands, and then maybe other SEACs are going to start jumping on board, which I assume they likely will. Okay. So yeah, if we could, I don't know that we need to make a motion to bring that around for next meeting. We'll just add that to our meeting items arising from our minutes for next meeting. Okay.
And can I just add one thing? I don't know whether it's under commission. I also sent a different video. I just thought, I don't know whether it goes under celebration, because I'm quite proud of this as far as, although my daughter isn't in it, but it was a video that was developed by a group of, a particular company called Dramaway, but it's their performers, but it's people with intellectual disabilities on basically their perspective of understanding COVID and the anxieties and these resources that they used. They're actually Canada Health resources that they've used to help them through some of it. It's a really, to me, it's a really hard word, because it's spoken by people with intellectual disabilities, explaining how they use these resources to help them understand COVID and some of the and help them with their mental health or their anxieties. And I had sent that to Andrea earlier as well, but I thought it was really cool.
Great. If you could send that too for circulation, that would be fantastic.
I know I posted it on my Facebook, my personal Facebook, but I'll send it as well.
Yeah, it'd be good. I think it would be something we'd all want to see anyway, just because it's uplifting, and we all need that right now, quite frankly. Is there any other community concerns that anybody needs to bring forward or wants to bring forward right now? Okay. Then we're moving on to celebrations and successes. Does anybody have any celebrations or successes that they like to bring forward? Yeah, Darlene, go ahead.
I just wanted to share that my daughter is if she gets all of this quadmester's credits, she is 1 credit, fingers and toes crossed, away from her high school diploma. Yay! So there's been many.
Congratulations. That is exciting.
We didn't know if this day would come, but whoop.
That's fantastic. Does anybody else have anything to top that? I don't know you can top that, but right now. No? Okay. Our next SEAC meeting is scheduled for May 20th, 2021, right here online, as usual. Can we have a motion to adjourn? Darlene, second by Rowan. All in favor? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Eva.